Hello and welcome to my review of Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. Once again, I don't think I will be editing this video, so this will just be a whole train of thought. And something I'd like to start off with is that my favorite booktuber, Frankie Shelf, does an entire run through the entirety of the book to describe it, and then he goes into his review of it. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is one of the most horrific novels that I've ever read in terms of the content of it. It has child sexual abuse in it, adult sexual abuse in it. It has obviously themes of abuse, drug addiction and things like that, or alcohol abuse, and those things aren't really, I would argue, not too bad to speak about, but the assault that happens to this child is absolutely horrific, and I don't want to go into details about that. On YouTube, I highly recommend that you read this book, but I don't want to just, when he goes into it, it's like a gossipy thing where he's like, and then this happened. I don't want to describe the book in this way and go through it like that, so I will not be doing that. But it is, like all of Toni Morrison's novel, packed with those types of things, and I want to clarify that it's not due to just for the shock factor of it, to make a scandalous story of something horrific happening. And also, I was going to say for something horrific happening and then the triumph over that. There is no triumph in many of Toni Morrison's stories. There's no resolution. It's kind of like in Disney movies. That is a vague, broad comparison, but in Disney movies, how you think that there's going to be an ending of, oh, he gets the girl, oh, he lands the house where he wants to land it, and it's never ending that way. You find out like, oh, I'm happy doing XYZ instead of my initial pursuit. All the movies are like that. The same for Toni Morrison's book, where there's not really a desired outcome at the very beginning of it, but you do hope the best for all these characters. You do hope that in the midst of these terrible stories, terrible situations where it was bound to be horrible from the start, simply due to the nature of where they are and who they are, you still somehow hope till the very last page that everything will turn around. They will end up in the castle, they will end up married to their prince, they will end up happy, and it never, ever, ever is like that. Throughout this book is only 200 pages, and near the end, like only 20 pages, 10 pages, I had to put it down and I didn't want to pick it back up. One, because Toni Morrison is my favorite author, and the idea of ending another one of her books and adding it to my shelf is really sad to me, considering I only have one or two more books of her left and I don't really want to end my journey with her. And two, just because it's horrific. You know, usually people are like, oh, I'm almost done with the book, I'm just gonna speed past these last pages, 100 pages even. I do that. I used to do that in the past with more light books, fantasy. I don't really read fantasy anymore, but books like that. This book, you just can't do that. You have to grieve almost every single page. And also, what I was trying to say earlier is she is not like another popular author, Anya Yanagihara, who wrote A Little Life, who just writes these things for the shock factor of it, where all this horrific abuse is occurring, and you want that happy ending at the end and you don't get it. In Yanagihara's writing, I felt as if it was written for the shock factor, for the, oh my god, like, this kid couldn't get a break. And I'm not entirely sure how to put that into words, the difference between that book and this book, where this young girl, Piccola, page after page, she doesn't get a break. The only good thing that happens to her is the one time when she was like 11 years old, when some friends took her in because her dad lit the house on fire and he was in jail, and she had to go stay with them, and they would feed her milk and crackers. And even then, the mom, they were feeding her milk and crackers because they like loved serving her, and then the mom was like, who is who is drinking all this milk in this house? And the girls did a wonderful job of describing how parents will talk negatively about somebody passive aggressively, just saying it out into the air. No one needs to be drinking this much milk. Who do they think I am? And you feel guilt in that. You feel guilt for having been a guest. And so even then, in like one of her happiest moments of her very I'm going to say short life, because in the book she doesn't die, but it's a short life in the time that we spend with her. One of the only happy moments in her short life is this, and even that is tainted. But it is distinctly different from the pain and horror that we see in Yanagihara's novel, where it just seems like it's made to teach no lessons, to have no backstory. That's what I really like about Toni Morrison's novel, and all of her novels, but because we're talking about the Bluest Eye, I'll say the Bluest Eye. In the Bluest Eye, you get a background on each and every character. You see, and I love books like this with multiple perspectives. You see why they are that way they are, and each of her novels are so nuanced and so layered that you understand why each character acts the way they act, even if you don't. It doesn't justify it at all. But we as humans are not animals. We don't do things on a whim where we see something and we immediately grab it or anything like that. There's years and years worth of trauma, worth of all the things that we've been put through in our own lives, of lived experiences, even if it wasn't trauma, even if it was I did this in the past and this happened, which I'll talk on in a moment. And this was a result, so I'm going to redo that again. And all those years of conditioning or abuse or trauma or just your lived experiences culminate into the moment when you see someone with a cookie and you snatch it out of their hand. You didn't do that out of like a animalistic instinct. You did that because of years worth of everything behind you. And Toni Morrison does a phenomenal job where you feel remorse, you feel pity, you feel all these deep range of emotions for each and every character, no matter how evil they are, no matter what atrocities they have committed. And of course, this doesn't justify what they've done, it doesn't justify anything, but it gives the book the humanity. It allows you to see that we are humans and the things that we do are not good, but this is why it happened. And that's what I felt like was missing in Yanagihara's novel, where it was just like, oh my god. If you haven't read Yanagihara's novel, I wouldn't recommend. I don't know why it became so big and people were raving about it. I remember reading it because people were saying I cried and cried during this novel. I've like never before. I was expecting it to be some sort of emotional turmoil book, not just like a horrific kid being abused every 10 pages, every 10 sentences, and you're like, oh, okay, like this. Okay, so you're not missing out on anything. If anything, I'd much rather you read a Toni Morrison novel where very similar, worse things happen, but it's more nuanced, it's more layered, and you walk away with having learned something for the rest of your life. There's a point in the book that I like actually like cried tears over. Even right now, just thinking about it, I'm tearing up. So I will give a slight backstory to the book to explain this part. So Pecola Breedlove is the young girl who's like the protagonist in the novel. The book is all about her, but she's not the one who is writing this novel. One of her other friends is from her perspective. But Pecola Breedlove was horrible life, and we see at the very beginning, it says, and Toni Morrison does a great job of like saying something in the beginning that you're like, what the heck does this mean? And it leads through the rest of the story, and we find that she was impregnated by her father, and she's only about 12 years old, and just horrific. And the part that made me sob and I had to put the book away is when her two little friends, Frida and the protagonist, I don't even know her name. They barely ever say her name. It's from her point of view. Frida is her sister, and there's another little girl, and they know that Pecola has been impregnated by her father because they're going around town. They're selling packets of seeds, and they hear these whispers, and they're like, oh gosh. And they themselves, they are so young that they don't even know how how horrific this crime is. They know that she's been impregnated, but they only think that it's kind of a problem because, well, they actually. So one of the things they say is, well, she's not married, but we know tons of other girls that are not married and have had a baby. So they begin to think, so they think initially that the reason why it's a problem is because she's not married, but they say, no, we know so many other girls. They don't even connect that it's because of her father, because the author specifies that, or states like, states that, exactly. They're like, we didn't know how to make a baby. We didn't know what was involved in making a baby, let alone that it shouldn't be done with your father. They even said, like, at least she knows who her father was and now the father of her baby, because that isn't really a most common thing in their community. So they're hearing these gossips, these word around towns, and the people are saying, I hope that baby dies, and I hope that baby dies. The word of mouth around town is just that they hope the baby dies. And Frida and her sister, they don't want that. I assume they're probably like 8 or 9 years old, maybe even younger, 7, and they want like Pecola for something happy to happen. They want a little bundle of joy in the world. They want to be against what everyone is saying. They want to wish Pecola happiness and love. And so they say to one another, let's, like, what should we do? Like, how can we help? And the older sister is Frida, and she's always saying these things that reveal her child. She is a child, her child state of mind. In the beginning, when Pecola, or I might have said Pecola earlier, Frida. In the beginning, when Pecola got her period, Frida says to her, like, bury her underwear, obviously, because she doesn't know what to do with soiled underwear during menstruation. She's a child. She does things and she acts out of maturity when she's not. She's a baby. And so the younger sister is asking Frida, what should we do? And she's like, well, we should pray. And the little sister says, like, like, last time that didn't work, like, the bird died anyway. The older sister says the bird was halfway dead. We have to really pray and ask God to let this baby live. And they say, like, well, what should we do then? And the packets of seeds that they're selling, they're doing that so that they could buy a bike. And they're like, well, I guess we should obviously, like, sacrifice something to God to really appease to him, and sacrifice our bike as well. And that part just made me bawl my eyes out. Like, these little girls with such innocence, such childish wonder even of the world, were wanting to help out their friends so much that they were going to sacrifice their bike and a packet of seeds to help her through this time. And the only way that they knew how to, they didn't know how to address such an adult, such a deep, such a terrible situation. And the only way they could is by praying and appeasing God through their bike and their packets. And and they say, like, oh, we'll know that we've appeased him if, like, the flowers grow. And they blame themselves for the baby dying because they think that they dug the flower seeds too deep and it wasn't sufficient enough and sufficient enough of a sacrifice. And I just bawled my eyes out at that. Just exactly what I said before, just the young frailty, the innocence, the childlike wonder of such horrible adult, even for the adult mind. How could you begin to comprehend that? How could you begin to accept that? How could you begin to help a child with that? And they go about it in such a pure way, and it just made me bawl. So the themes of the novel, I know this is just like a big word salad of everything that I'm thinking about the book. The themes of the novel are, once again, generational trauma. Toni Morrison, throughout all of her books, just goes deep into the generational trauma. She primarily does it from slavery. This one has very heavy themes of that as well, into the effects of racism and how that imbues itself into your self-concept and the way that you treat others, and that for example, Charlie, instead of being mad at white men because his subconscious mind realizes, whether this is true or not, this is what the book says. Oh, bless me. Whether this is true or not, this is what the book says, that if he had put that hatred onto the white men that were mocking him and humiliating him in such a intimate moment of his life, which I won't go into, that he would have been consumed by that for the rest of his life and unable to move on from such a deeply disturbing moment in his life of that. And so instead he turns that on to the women, and instead he turns it into wanting to hate them, strangle them, beat them, do horrible things to them. He describes it later on as this freedom to, if the white man is mean to him, that's okay, because he will be mean to a black woman, he can be mean to his children, he can do whatever he'd like. And similarly, his wife says the same, like she might be put down by the white people in her life, the white masters she's working as a maid for a white family, and then she's like, and then the black woman is like at the bottom because everybody else in the world, like your husband's gonna beat you, the white people are gonna beat you, the only other people that are on par with you are the other black women, and then you can, she describes it as, beat your child with one hand and steal food for them with the other. And that all goes back to the slavery and the, even though they describe this as being, of course, like not even though, but the result of slavery and the effects that it has even so far later in history, so far later, because she describes this as being like the Industrial Revolution time. They're in the town of Lorain, Ohio, with a steel, where her dad was working like a steel mill job. They moved over there for that, and so that is the biggest theme of the novel, the generational trauma of that, and how it imbues into every aspect of your life, whether it be in the desire to be better than somebody else and to take that out upon the people that are then beneath you, in the way that, as I described in my earlier video, not properly being told or about the world or learning about the world in a pure sense, because as I said in my previous video, if you haven't watched that, there are 3 prostitutes who wouldn't, if Piccola had said like, I want to be a prostitute, because these were her friends, they wouldn't have guided her away from that, because in my opinion, they themselves, even being older, are still children, are still of the mindset that, of such an immature mindset, to not want better for your peers, to not want better for the next generation, because you yourself went through it and it's all you've known. And I think that is an effect as well of not having a safe way to learn about the world and a safe foundation for you to grow upon is that. And so it presents itself in all different types of ways, from the assault from her father, from the prostitutes, from this video is going to be taken down, from her mother beating her while she tends to a white child instead. As I said, her mother is a maid. All these horrific, horrible things, all from that result. And yeah, and specifically in The Bluest Eye, the saddest part is, I will have to reread this because I noticed that as the main theme, in my opinion, of the generational trauma. But there's also, I think, the hidden, not the hidden, but because it's the main title, but it was definitely under the surface. It wasn't as prevalent, it wasn't as in your face of, and it was in the beginning, but not so much as I continued to read. I think that's more implied, but it wasn't as in your face as it was in the beginning, of the concept and the reality of growing up in a world that's not made for you, in the sense that you being a minority or a black woman or a black person in America, in a world that it loves and idealizes and white women, or whiteness in general, and being lighter. And this shows in one of the final parts of the book where Pecola is pregnant. She has now been taken out of school because her mother doesn't want other people to see her in the state. I assume that's not because for the protection of Pecola, but rather for the family's own protection, even though they didn't go quite too deep into that, but knowing her mother, I do think that's the case. And Pecola she goes to this witch doctor, she goes to this man, and she asks him for blue eyes so that people will be nice to her. I think that says everything in it of itself. I think that's the whole thing right there, that despite the horrors of the world happening to her and everybody failing her around every corner, Pecola still internalizes that in herself and still believes that if she were the prettier, desired type of person in America, that she would be treated different, that things would be turned out for her. And again, she is a child. She doesn't actively recognize these things. She thinks these things to her. She believes these things. It's her reality. That if only she were a different skin color, if only she had blue eyes, if only she were beautiful, she would be lovable. That's something that the book goes back to time and time again. The idea, perception that being beautiful means being lovable, and in a world like America, that means being white. So I think that's my end of this review for this beautiful book. I love books like these, but they're very hard to recommend to others, because then like, oh, like, I'm sorry that you've read that. I'm sorry that you've read something so graphic but Toni Morrison again does a beautiful way of not making it too graphic, but making it human. Like the scenes in it, whether they're loving scenes with like the sex. I don't like to read smut books. I don't read smut books, but she doesn't go into like sexual, sensual details of the books, but she does do like describing them in like a human way. And then the more horror scenes, she again doesn't go into like the horrors of it, but the objective reality of it. And I think that's one of the ways that Toni Morrison sets herself apart from the rest. And everything is deeply human. Everything is as it is in human reality. So thank you, Toni Morrison, for another wonderful novel. You are everything. Thank you for watching, and have a good day. Okay, bye.